A wolf the size of a plow horse stood in the middle of my road, and it would not move. My horse knew before I did. She stopped without being asked, ears flat, breath going out of her in a long shudder, and 40 riders came up short in the mud behind me. Every one of them reached for something, a spear, a bow, a charm sewn into a collar. The sound of it was like hail coming down on a roof. "Hold," I said. The wolf was gray the way old silver is gray, with a dark stripe running from crown to shoulder and a white ring around one eye. It stood broadside across the cart ruts, which is not how a hunting beast stands. A hunting beast comes at you narrow, so there is less of it for you to put a spear into. This one had made itself as wide as a gate. It looked at me. Not at my horse, which was the loudest and most frightened thing in that road. Not at my spearmen. At me, and it looked at me the way a steward looks at a man who has come to the door too late and is about to be told so. I had ridden that road 11 times a year for 11 years. I had ridden it as a boy behind my father with my legs too short for the stirrups. It is the Crown's road, cut through the Ellenwood at the northern edge of Greyhollow, and there is nothing on it ever but carts and rain. The wolf turned its head, unhurried, and looked north into the trees. Then it walked off the road. It did not run. That is the part I have never been able to make anybody understand who was not there. It went at a walk, the way a man walks off a field when the day's work is done, and there is no reason on earth to hurry, and the ferns took it, and the wood closed behind it like water closing over a dropped stone. 40 men breathed out at once. "That is the 3rd time," said Reeve Halloran, easing his horse up on my right. He said it the way a man lays down a card he has been holding all evening. "The 3rd time this month it has put itself in front of your road, my king. And it has killed nothing." "Not yet." "Not ever," I said. "Not a sheep, not a cow, not a child. 11 years, and I have never had a claim against a wolf out of the Ellenwood." "Then perhaps it has been waiting for something," Halloran said, "and perhaps it has stopped waiting. I have been Alpha King of Greyhollow for 11 years. I have taken a spear through the meat of my thigh at Corran Ford and finished the day on my feet and slept that night sitting up against a wheel, because lying down would have meant help. I do not frighten easily, and I was not frightened in that road. What I felt was worse and stranger. I felt addressed, as though something had come up out of the Ellenwood specifically in order to have a word with me, and had waited in the mud to have it, and had found me not worth the trouble and had gone home. We rode on. Nobody spoke for half a mile, which for 40 men is a long time, and then Halloran spoke, because he always did, and because he had been waiting for exactly the length of silence that would make it land. "They call it the Grey Sovereign," he said. "The wood folk. 400 winters, they say, which is nonsense, but it is old nonsense. My grandfather's people said the same, and the beast they said it about had the same white ring on the same eye. It has never bowed to a king. It has never taken a collar, never taken an arrow, never taken a hound pack. And now, my king, the northern tithe comes in short by half. 4 wood villages are crying famine at the door of a good harvest year, and a man might ask himself what has been eating their winter stores. A wolf does not eat barley. A wolf does not need to eat barley. A wolf drives men off their ground. He had an answer for everything, Halloran, and he had it fast, and it was always shaped to fit the last thing you said, and I had liked that about him for 11 years, which is a thing I have had a long time since to be ashamed of. They will not go out to the coppices. They will not run their snare lines past dusk. They sit in their houses burning their own fence rails, and they send me no tithe, and they send you no men, and by the thaw they will start dying of it, and the story that reaches your hall will be the king, let the north starve. Give me the drive, 200 beaters and a line of bows across the northern rides, and we will have the thing skinned by the new moon and the villages back on their ground by the one after." The road came up out of the wood and onto the ridge, and the whole northern country opened up below us, gray and brown and green, wet as a rag, 400 square miles of the thing I was responsible for. I will look at Hollowbeck first, I said. Halloran's jaw moved once, just once, and then his face was the same pleasant, weathered face it had been. There is nothing at Hollowbeck to look at, my king. Then it will not take long. I have gone back over that exchange perhaps 1,000 times. He could have talked me out of it. He was better at talking than I have ever been, and he had 11 years of knowing exactly which of my prides to lean on. He did not do it, and I think I know why, because he had never once in all that time seen me look at anything closely. I signed what he put in front of me. I rode where he pointed. He had no reason on earth to think that this would be the week I started. There was nothing at Hollowbeck to look at, and that was the whole of what I saw. 11 houses of turf, and split oak in a clearing at the wood's edge, with a beck running past them so cold it smoked in the morning. A fold with 9 sheep in it and no gaps in the hurdles, a drying rack, a byre, and the grain loft up on its stone staddles to keep the rats out, standing open at both ends. I rode my horse in under it and out the other side, and did not have to duck for anything. Not short, not low, empty and swept. That was the thing that lodged in me and would not come out. The boards were bare and clean, and there was a besom stood in the corner with its bristles still splayed from use. A starving village does not sweep its loft. A starving village leaves the last dust and chaff exactly where it lies and comes back 3 times a week to look at it, because looking at it is free. Somebody had cleaned that loft the way you clean a room before company. The folk came out to me the way wood folk do, slowly and then all at once. 20-odd of them out of 11 houses, and every single one thin in the face in the way that takes longer than a bad month to do. They knelt in the wet. When I told them to stand, they stood too fast, the way men stand when they have been told to stand and are frightened of what is coming after. I asked who spoke for them. An old man with a wrist swollen to twice its size said he did, and then he said nothing at all, at very great length. When did the loft empty? The wolf came, my king. How many head have you lost to it? The wolf came. Answer the question I asked. Has any beast taken 1 sheep out of that fold? He looked past my shoulder. I did not turn because I did not need to. I knew what was behind my shoulder. Halloran sat his horse with his hands crossed on the pommel and his hat pushed back, comfortable as a man at a fair. The wolf came, the old man said. I have had men lie to me from a scaffold with the rope already round them. I had never in my life heard a man lie so badly and so bravely at the same time. I walked the length of that village. I looked in the byre and the fold and 2 of the houses whose owners opened them to me, and in one of them a woman had a pot on with nothing in it but water and 3 winter turnips and a bone that had been boiled so often it had gone chalky. There were 4 children in that house. There was 1 blanket. Nobody would say the word cart. I did not know yet that there was a word cart to say. I only knew, with the flat animal certainty you get sometimes before you get the reason, that I was being handled, that this entire village was standing in the rain performing its own ruin for me and would go on performing it until I left. Enough, I said. Water the horses, we ride at first light. And that was when I saw her. She was out past the last house at the top of the snare line, kneeling in the wet fern with her back to a king and 40 riders, and she was working at something with both hands. Not hiding, not gawping, working. Her skirt was soaked to the knee, and there was a sling of moss at her hip, green as a new pond, and her hair was the color of wet bark and coming loose out of its tie. I walked my horse up the slope. She did not turn. She had a hare in her lap. It had gone into the snare wrong and taken the wire round the shoulder instead of the throat, which is a slow way to be caught and a bad one, and she had the wire in one hand and the hare's head cupped under the other with 2 fingers laid flat over its eyes. Her mouth was moving. No sound came out of it. Not a whisper, not a hum, nothing a horse's ear would have caught at 2 paces. Her lips shaped something and stopped and shaped it again, and the hare, which should have been drumming its back legs hard enough to snap its own spine, lay in her lap like a thing asleep in front of a fire. The wire came free. She lifted her hand off its eyes. The hare sat up, looked around at the situation it had woken into, and went off into the fern at a speed I can only call rude. "That was my supper," said one of my men, and laughed, and the laugh went along the line the way laughs do. She stood up then and turned, and she had a face like a plain door in a plain wall, no beauty in it that would make a poet stop, nothing you would pick out of a market crowd, and she looked at me the way she would have looked at weather. "My king," she said. She did not kneel. There was a wire cut across 2 knuckles and she was not minding it. "You were praying." "No." "Then what were you doing?" She looked at me a moment longer, and it was a long moment. I have had ambassadors from 3 courts take less time to decide how much of the truth to hand me. "Getting it to hold still," she said. "Speak up, girl," Halloran called from down the slope. "Kings do not lean." "This one leaned," she said, not loud, and she was right. I straightened and did not enjoy it. "Your name?" "Wenna." "Wenna, your loft is swept." Something crossed her face and was gone before I could name it. It was not fear. I have made a study of fear. It is most of what a crown shows you. It was the look of a person who has been waiting a very long time for one particular thing to be noticed, and has given up expecting it, and now has about 2 heartbeats to decide what it is worth. "Yes," she said. "It is." "By whom?" "My king." Halloran's horse came up the slope and put itself between us the way horses do when their riders wish them to. The light is going and the ford runs high after dark, and that one does not speak at gatherings. Ask any soul here. She has never once spoken at a gathering in her life. There is nothing to be had there. "I did not ask her at a gathering," I said. But the moment had a door in it, and he had shut the door. And this is the part that I turned over for weeks afterward. She had let him. She stood there and let a reeve close a door in front of a king, and she did not put so much as a finger against it. By the time I had my horse turned, she was walking away down the snare line with the sling of moss swinging at her hip, and the wood was going blue behind her, and I had the strong and unwelcome sense of having failed a test that nobody had told me was being set. I gave Halloran his drive that night at the muster camp, and I want to set down plainly how I did it, because it was the worst hour's work of my reign, and it took about 4 minutes. He asked for 200 beaters. I gave him 140 and a line of bows across the northern rides, and I told myself it was because a king who rides north into a famine must be seen to do something. And that is the exact sentence that every bad thing I have ever done was wearing when it came to my door. Something must be seen to be done. I have since made it a rule that when I hear that sentence in my own head, I sit down and do nothing at all until it stops. Then I went and lay in a tent and did not sleep, and what came instead was the hall. It always comes at night and it always comes whole, and it has not faded in 50 years. I was 19. I had been king for 9 days. Understand what a Greyhollow Hall was then. It is a long stone room with a fire trench down the middle, and the smoke going up through a louver in the roof, and when it is full there are 200 people in it, and every one of them is looking at the seat at the end. My father had been 3 weeks in the ground. My uncle Corwin had been in that hall the whole 3 weeks with his hand on shoulders, saying nothing anybody could take to a court, and the thing he had been saying with his hand on all those shoulders was, "The boy is his mother's." And they had a word for his mother. She had been dead 3 years by then. Queen Malin of Greyhollow out of the north, and she had come to my father's house with 3 words of the old tongue that her grandmother had taught her at a river when she was 7, 1 word at a time, 100 repetitions each, no meanings given, and she was very good with them. Better than good. She used them on the hounds first, because hounds are safe, and then on the horses, and then on the wolves that ran with our house. I remember the wolf yard. I remember being 5 years old and sat on the top rail with my father's hand flat on my back, and my mother going out into the middle of that yard in a green dress with her hands empty and saying a word. And the pack came out of the dark, all of it. 9 wolves out of the kennel mouth and over the yard and down around her chair like a tide coming in and lying there, and one of them putting its head on her foot and my mother going on with her sewing. The court called that a gift for 11 years. Then my father died, and the men who wanted my uncle on the seat instead of a boy of 9 needed a story, and overnight the word for what she did stopped being gift. Be speaker. It sounds like nothing written down. You have to have heard it said in a hall, the little pause they put before it, the way it turns a name into a thing. They put it in front of hers for 4 years. Be speaker. Which of the kennels? Every time a cow slipped a calf in that entire county it was laid at her door, and every time she crossed the yard someone counted how long she stayed, and a steward began writing the count in a book, and the book was shown to people. She stopped going to the yard. Then she stopped saying the words. Then she stopped saying much of anything, and she took to her chamber in the winters, and in the 4th winter she got a cough that a woman who went outdoors and walked about would very likely have shaken off, and she was dead before the thaw. I was 16. I had a sword by then, and no idea where to put it. 9 days a king, and I stood up in that hall and I made a law. I can still hear my own voice doing it. 19 years old and cracking on the long words, and I said that the old tongue was the speech of a country that no longer existed, that it was the crack through which every superstition in the North got into a decent house, that it had brought shame on the crown itself within living memory, and that from that day forward no man, woman or child would speak one word of it in any hall of Greyhollow, on pain of the king's displeasure. Which is a phrase that sounds mild and means whatever the man holding it wants it to mean. And the hall roared. That is the thing I could not have understood at 19 and understood perfectly at 30. They loved it. My uncle's own men came up afterward and gripped my arm and told me my father would have been proud because I had just done for them, for free, in public, in my mother's own son's voice, the exact thing they had been trying to do to her for 4 years. I had put the seal on it. I had made Be Speaker into a matter of law and made myself the one who signed it. I told myself for 11 years that it was a cleansing, that I had pulled up a shame by the root. It was not that. I want to be exact, because being inexact about it is what cost me 11 years. It was a boy making absolutely certain that nobody would ever again be able to say that word about anyone belonging to him. She was already dead. I did not protect one hair of her head. I made a law so that I would never have to hear the word again, and I called it justice, and every child born in Greyhollow since had grown up not learning 3 words at a beck. I did not sleep. At dawn, I got up and went out and gave the order to put the beaters in, because a king who has spent a night with that is not fit to be reasoned with, and I was not reasoned with, and because Halloran was standing there with his hat in his hand looking pleased, and I did not have it in me that morning to disappoint anybody. The drive went into the Ellenwood at first light, and I sat my horse at the head of the long ride with the beck on my left, and watched a wood come apart. You could hear it from a mile off. That flat, awful tinny clatter, 140 men beating iron pans and dragging poles through the understory in a line half a mile wide, shouting nothing in particular, just noise, moving north at a walking pace. A drive empties a wood of everything that can run and turns everything that cannot into a target. It is not hunting. Hunting has some respect in it somewhere. A drive is a broom. Deer came out first, as they always do, a dozen row going up the ride in that stiff-legged bounce, and then, after a gap, a red hind with a yearling that had been born late and could not keep up, and I watched a bow take the yearling at 90 paces and my men cheered, and the hind went up the ride alone and did not stop and did not look back, because they do not. Then the hares, in numbers that made the line laugh out loud, 30, 40 of them, streaming up the ride like water finding a channel. Then the birds, which is the part nobody expects. Woodcock and pigeon and a heron out of the beck going over us all at once, low, in every direction, and for about 10 heartbeats the sky over that ride was full of things trying to get away from us. Then a boar sow with her litter strung out behind her like beads on a string, 6 of them, and a bow took the sow because a bow will, and she went down and slid, and the 6 of them ran in 6 directions and were gone into the fern and would all be dead inside a fortnight. I sat and watched that, and I felt precisely nothing that a king is supposed to feel, and I have wondered since whether that emptiness was the beginning of understanding, or just the last of the not understanding. The clatter came closer. You could see the tops of the poles now, above the hazel, working north. "There," said Halloran. Gray in the ride, 300 paces up, moving toward the bows. Not running, I want that said again, because every account of that morning that was told in taverns afterward has it charging, and it never charged. It never once in its 400 winters charged anything. It came up that ride at a walk. And then, at 150 paces, it did the thing it had done to me on the road. It turned side-on and put itself broadside across the ride, between the bows and the wood behind it, and stood. "Knock," said the bow captain, and 40 men put arrows on strings, and the sound of 40 bows coming up together is a sound like a long breath. And a woman walked out of the fern into the ride. She came from the left, from the beck side, through a gap in the brambles that no rider would have taken and no sane person would have found, with her skirt gathered up in one fist and her other hand held out flat and low at her side. She did not look at the bows. She did not look at me. She walked up the middle of that ride to the wolf, and she turned, and she put herself between 400 winters of animal and 40 drawn strings, and she stood there. "Loose," Halloran shouted. "Hold," I roared. I have a voice for it. It is the one part of being a king that has ever come easily to me. I can put a word across a battlefield. 40 strings came down. One did not. I saw whose. A man on the left of the line with his cheek still on the string and his eyes still down the shaft, holding, deciding. He held for perhaps 2 heartbeats after the king of Greyhollow had said hold, and then he let the string forward, and he lived, and he walked back to the capital rather than rode, and he had 4 days on the road to think about which of those 2 heartbeats he wanted to be the rest of his life. Wenna of Hollowbeck stood in the middle of my drive line with her back to a wolf the size of a plow horse. It had lowered its head beside her shoulder, close enough that its breath moved her hair, close enough that if it had wanted her it would have had her before any man there could have shouted. Her mouth was moving, no sound. "You see it," Halloran said. He was breathing hard and his horse was picking it up off him and shifting under him. "My king, you see it now. She calls it. She has been calling it down on us since." "I see a woman standing in front of my arrows," I said, "which is more than I can say for you or for me." And I walked my horse down that ride alone. Slowly, hands open on the reins in plain sight, the way you go up to a strange dog that has already decided something about you. 200 paces takes a very long time at that pace. The wolf watched me the whole way, and its eyes in daylight were the yellow of old honey, and there was nothing whatever in them of the animal I had been told about for a month. There was consideration. There was an enormous, worn-out patience, the patience of something that has watched a great many men come up a road, and has formed a general view of men, and is not expecting to be surprised. And under the patience, plainly, there was tiredness. 10 paces off, it turned and went into the fern, and I saw exactly how it went, and it mattered. It did not startle and it did not check. It waited until I was near enough that she was safe. Then it left her with me and walked away into the trees. "He is not doing what you think he is doing," Wenna said. "And what do I think he is doing?" "Guarding a larder." She was white to the lips now that it was over, and she was holding herself very straight so that I would not see her hands. I saw her hands. He has been guarding the ridge road. He puts himself in front of anything that moves on it, and he does not move until it turns back or goes round. He did it to you 3 times. He did it to the Reeves carts twice in the autumn and once at the turn of the year. And once he stood in front of a cart from noon until dark, until the drivers unhitched and took the beasts home, and came back the next week by the droveway instead. Everything went quiet inside me. In the particular way things go quiet when a shape you have been staring at for a month turns over in front of you and shows you its other side. Carts, I said. 11 of them since Michael's day. Loaded which way? Loaded going out of the wood, she said. Empty going in. I sat there on a horse in a broken wood with a dead sow behind me and 140 men beating pans a quarter-mile off, and I said, "Why has nobody told me this?" And Wenner of Hollowbeck looked up at me with those plain, steady, entirely unfrightened eyes and said, "You are being told now." And then, after a moment, "My king," and it was not an apology, it was punctuation. I stopped the drive. I sent the beaters back to camp with Halloran, and I told him to have the whole muster at the great clearing at the new moon. I gave him 14 days, and he took them gladly, which ought to have told me a great deal about how sure of his ground he was. Then I did not go back to my hall. I sent my riders to the camp, and I stayed at the wood's edge above Hollowbeck with 2 men who I told to sleep, and I built a fire, and I built it badly. And after full dark, a woman came out of the trees with a wooden bowl of milk and set it down in the fern 20 paces off, and came back, and sat down on the other side of my bad fire without being asked. "For him," I said. "For whatever wants it. He does not need milk." She held her hands out to what heat there was. Somebody had dressed the wire cut on her knuckles with clean linen, and in a village where 4 children slept under one blanket, somebody had spared linen for her hands, and I found that I minded that in a way I could not name for a long time afterward. He needs to be asked for nothing. That is the whole of what he needs. "You built this fire green side up." "I did." "It will smoke and go out." "It will," I said. "I am aware. I am giving it the chance to surprise me." And she laughed. Once, low, more breath than voice, as though it had got out before she could stop it, and she was already annoyed about it. And the wood went quiet. I have to be careful here, because I have heard men describe a moment like this as a stroke of lightning, and it was not that at all. Nothing surged, nothing sang. There was no thunder, and nothing in my chest moved. What happened was this: every small sound in that wood stopped at once. The beck kept going because water does not care. But all the rest of it, the ticking and shifting and small dry rustling that a wood makes continuously all night, the sound you stop hearing after an hour because it is simply what the dark is made of, all of it stopped inside the same half-second. The way a crowded room stops when every single person in it has heard the same thing at the same moment and is turning the same way to look. And I stopped with it. That is the part I have never been able to explain to anybody, and I have tried perhaps 6 times in 50 years. For that half-second I was not a separate thing standing in that wood. I was one more thing in it that had heard something and turned. Then the wood started up again, and I was a man of 30 sitting by a dead fire with his heart going like a boy's. "Tell me what you do with your mouth," I said. She did not pretend not to understand, which I have found is the rarest quality there is. "I say 3 words." "Which words?" "I do not know," she said. "That is the truth, so please do not be angry at the truth. My grandmother had them from hers. She taught them to me at the beck when I was 7, 1 word at a time, and she made me say each one back 100 times before she would give me the next, and she never told me what any of them meant. She said a word in the old tongue is not a coin, it is a key, and you do not tell a child what is behind the door." "The old tongue," I said. "Yes. You know it is forbidden." "I know it is forbidden in your halls," she said. "I have never been in your halls." I put a green branch on the fire and it hissed at me and did nothing whatsoever, which served me right. And then I told her about my mother. I had not told anybody. 11 years and I had not said Malin's name aloud to another living soul except to sign a charter for her chantry, and I sat in the wet fern and told a moss-gatherer the whole of it. The wolf yard, the green dress, the tide of wolves coming in around her chair. My uncle's hand on all those shoulders. The word. The steward's book with the counting in it. The chamber and the winters and the cough. And the hall and the boy of 19, and the law. I told myself for 11 years that I had pulled up a shame by the root, I said. I want to be exact with you because I have not been exact with myself about it. It was not that. She was already 3 years dead. I did not protect her by one hair. I made a law so that I would never again have to stand in a room and hear that word said about someone of mine, and I called it justice. And the men who had hunted her cheered me for it, and I let them, because I was 19 and they were cheering. The fire went out. I had known it would. Wenna sat with it a long while. When she spoke, it was not what I expected. He is 400 winters old, she said. Give or take a lifetime. Nobody counts, they only pass it on. There is one to a wood. That is the whole of the logic, my king, and it is not much, but it is all there is. A moon wolf is a wood's memory. It lasts as long as the wood does. It will not answer iron, and it will not answer a horn, and it will not answer a crown, because those are all the same thing to it, noise made by something that will be dead in 40 years. It will only answer a name said properly in the old tongue. She turned her hand over in her lap, palm up, as though showing me it was empty. That is not magic being clever. That is just being asked correctly, and there is very nearly nobody left who can ask. And you can. I can say 3 words. One of them is his name. She was looking out at the milk bowl sitting untouched in the fern. The other 2 I have never used in my life because I do not know what they do, and my grandmother's one warning was that you do not use a key on a door you have not looked at. You could have taken that to any lord in the north. Any one of them would have made you rich for it. And been called what your mother was called, she said. No, I keep to the snare line. I stood up. It had become necessary to stand up. Wenna of Hollowbeck, who swept your grain loft. She got up too, and shook out her wet skirt, and looked at me steadily across a dead fire and said, Come to the muster at the new moon and ask me that in front of everybody, and I will answer you in front of everybody, and not before. Why? Because if I answer you here in the dark, she said, then tomorrow it is one woman's word against a Reeves. And I know precisely how far that goes, and so do you, or your mother would be alive. I had 14 days, and I used them, and it is the only fortnight of my early reign I am not ashamed of. I did not go to Halloran's camp. I went to Aldern and sat in a cold room with the tithe rolls for the northern wards for 6 years, and I found that I could not read them. Not the words, the shape. I could read every line and understand nothing, because I had never in my life looked at a tithe roll. I had signed the summary. So I sent for a clerk who was so frightened of me that he could barely hold a pen, a thin man named Prentice with ink to the elbow, and I told him I did not want the summary. I wanted the working, and he asked in a whisper whether he might have 4 days, and I said he might have as many as he liked, and I sat in that room with him while he did it, which I think frightened him worse than anything. On the 3rd day, he stopped writing and sat very still. My king, he said, the northern lofts are receipted twice. Explain it to me as though I am a soldier, because I am. The wood villages pay their tithe in grain to the ward store. That is one receipt, signed at the village. Then the ward store is carted down to the crown store at Aldern, and that is a second receipt signed here. He turned the book round. The village receipts are all here. Signed, sealed, correct. Hollowbeck, Cadger's End, Thorn, Little Rhine, all 4 paid in full in a good year, my king. They paid you everything they had at Michael's day. And the second receipt? There is no second receipt, Prentice said. Not for 4 villages, not since Michael's day. The grain left the villages. It never arrived here. And because the summary only ever shows the crown store, what came to your hand was, he swallowed, was, the northern wards are short. I sat in that room for a long moment and did not trust myself to move. They had not been robbed of their surplus. They had paid their tithe, in full, in a good year, like honest people. And then the tithe itself had been stolen off the road between them and me, and the theft had been reported to me as their failure, and I had ridden north with 40 men to look at them for it, and stood in a house where 4 children had 1 blanket, and asked an old man with a broken wrist why he would not tell me the truth. Who signs the ward store? The Reeve, my king. Say the name. Reeve Halloran, said Prentice, and put his forehead down on the desk, and I let him because it was a reasonable thing to do. I did not arrest him. I want to explain that because it looks like cowardice, and it was not, or not only. I had a clerk, a gap in a book, and a woman's word about carts. Halloran had 11 years of my seal on his warrants, 4 wards worth of men who had eaten at his table, and 140 beaters in a camp who thought he was the man saving them from a monster. If I had taken him on paper in a room, he would have been out of it inside a month with a story about a jealous clerk, and Wenna of Hollowbeck would have been the witch who put a wolf in the road, and she would have been dead within the year, and I would have signed that too. She had understood all of that at a dead fire in the fern, with no book and no clerk and no crown, and had told me exactly what to do about it, in front of everybody. So I sat on it for 11 days, which was the hardest thing I have ever done, including Corin Ford. The new moon came, and the muster with it. 140 beaters, my 40 riders, the wood folk brought down from all 4 villages, the crown's men from 3 wards, the whole of it packed into the great clearing at the heart of the Ellenwood, where the ridge road comes through and the old droveway branches off it. 180 souls or better. No moon at all, that being the point of a new moon. Torches on poles at the 4 sides and the smell of pitch over everything, and the trees standing round us in a ring like a court that had come early and taken all the good seats. Halloran did not wait for me to open it. That was his one mistake, and I have thought since that he made it because he had watched me for 11 years and had learned, quite correctly, that I liked a thing settled fast and would nearly always take the fastest road put in front of me. My king. He came out into the torchlight with his hat off and his voice pitched to reach the trees. Before the drive goes in again, this muster must hear a matter, and I will be the one to say it since no other man here will. The beast is called. It comes when it is wanted and goes when it is done. It has stood in front of your carts. It has stood in front of your road 3 times and looked you in the face. It has stood in front of 40 drawn bows and walked away untouched. That is not an animal, my king. That is a servant. And he turned and put his arm out straight, and every torch in that clearing followed it. And there stands the hand that whistles. She was at the edge of the light with the sling of moss still at her hip, because she had come straight up from the snare line, because it had not occurred to her to dress for the end of her life. The clearing made that low sound that a crowd makes. I have heard it in halls and in market squares, and once in a church. It is the sound of a great many people being given permission at the same time. And then somebody said the word. Out of the dark on the left side, small and clear and almost conversational, be speaker. And it went through me like a spearhead going through the same hole it had made when I was 16 years old. My king, said Halloran, I ask that she be taken up under your own edict. And there it was, laid on the table in front of 180 people, in the exact shape I had made it in when I was 19 and cracking on the long words. My law, my word, my mother's grave, in his mouth pointed at her. He had not stolen my grain in the end. That was only money. He had stolen my law and turned it round. Wenna of Hollowbeck, I said, and my voice went flat out across that clearing. You are accused of speaking the old tongue. I have, she said. You are not obliged to answer. I know, She came forward into the light, but I said I would answer in front of everybody, so. And then she turned so that she was not facing me. That is the thing I remember most exactly out of the whole of that night, more exactly than the wolf. She turned her back on the king of Greyhillow and faced the muster, the beaters, the riders, the 4 villages, the crown's men, Halloran with his hat in his hand. And she stood there in a wet skirt with a wire cut across her knuckles, and she was not shaking any more. My grandmother taught me 3 words at the beck when I was 7, she said. I have used one of them, 11 times since Michael's day, to put a wolf across the ridge road in front of the Reeves carts. The clearing went absolutely silent. Because I could not stop 11 carts of Hollowbeck's winter tithe from going out of this wood, she said, and I could not make anybody in my village say so out loud, because the Reeve holds the Ward store and the Ward store holds the seed corn, and a village that accuses him does not get seed in the spring and dies the year after instead of this one. But a moon wolf can stand in a road all day, and does not tire, and cannot be flogged for it. That is a lie, said Halloran. Then let the wood say, said Wenna of Hollowbeck. And she lifted her chin, and she spoke out loud in the old tongue. I cannot set it down. I have tried on paper and it looks like nonsense because our letters are the wrong shape for it. It was one word and it was long. It came up out of her chest and not out of her throat, and there were no edges anywhere in it. All of it was curved, a word built to travel a long way through trees without breaking. She said it once and let it stand in the air. She said it again. And on the third saying, the hair went up along both my arms, and every torch in that clearing bent the same way at once though there was no wind at all, and 180 men turned their heads to the north side of the ring, without one single one of them having decided to. He came out of the dark at a walk. He came through them, through 140 men who had spent a fortnight sharpening things for precisely this moment, and they went aside for him like standing grass, and not one hand came up. He came into the ring of torchlight gray as old silver, the dark stripe from crown to shoulder, the white ring round the one eye, and he was so much bigger in that close pitch light than he had been out on the road in the rain that a crowned man near my stirrup sat down in the mud and simply stayed there. He walked past me as though I were a post in the ground. He stopped in front of Wenna of Hollowbeck, and he put his head down and further down, until his muzzle lay flat on the wet ground at her feet, and then his shoulders came down after it. 400 winters of a wood that had never once knelt to any crowned thing in the north, kneeling in the mud in front of a moss gatherer with a sling at her hip, in torchlight, in front of everybody. And then he said her name. I need it understood that I am not a poetic man and that there were 180 witnesses, of whom some are still alive and can be asked. It was not a howl. It was not a trick of the ear or of the torches. It came out of him low and slow and shaped, with stops in it, and it was her name in the old tongue, the way her name would have sounded before there was any Greyhillow to sit a king in. Wenna, with 2 syllables in front of it that I could not hold on to, that slid off my mind like water off oiled wool. Every soul in that clearing heard it, and every soul in that clearing knew what it was. Somebody began to weep, quite loudly, without embarrassment. A dozen men knelt and did not appear to know that they had. Then he said one word more, and I understood it. I did not have one word of the old tongue in my head. My mother took her 3 into the ground with her when I was 16. In 11 years I had never learned so much as a good night in it, and had made it a crime to teach me. And that second word went into me whole and came out the other side with its meaning still attached, not translated, not worked out. Simply known, the way your own name is known when it is called across a market. Hearthfellow. Not his, not taken, not claimed, not mine. I have had 50 years to learn since that the old tongue has no word at all for a person belonging to a person. It has a word for 2 who share one fire, and it makes no distinction of rank inside it, and there is no way to say it about someone who has not agreed. He said it looking at her. Then he turned his great head and looked at me, and said it again. My legs did something I had not authorized. My king, Halloran said. He had got his voice back, and there was much less of it than there had been. My king, this is precisely what I have been. Be quiet, I said, and he was, and he stayed quiet for the rest of his life as far as I ever heard. I came forward into the middle of that ring. The great gray head came up off the ground and turned to follow me, and I stopped where he stopped me, which was 2 paces short of her. Wenna, I said, ask him where the carts went. She said the second word, the one she had never used in her life, because she did not know what it did. He rose, he shook himself once the way any dog does. And he went out of the ring at a trot, and stopped at the black line of the trees, and looked back at us over his shoulder. We followed a wolf through the Ellenwood by torchlight for the better part of an hour, 180 of us, strung out along the ridge road and then off it, onto the old droveway that is choked waist-high with bramble and has not carried a wheel in a generation, except that it plainly had. I got down off my horse and put my own hand into the clay and felt the wheel scars, and then I made Halloran get down and put his hand in them too, and he did, and said nothing. And at the end of it, under a bank in a stand of black yew, there was a barrow mound with a fallen stone door in the side of it, and on the fallen door there was a new iron lock. Inside, stacked to the roof and dry as a bone on a floor of clean straw, were sacks, barley and rye and beans and a good deal of oats. Every sack was stamped with the Grey Hello seal, in my own black wax, in my own name. Enough to have carried 4 villages through to the thaw twice over. Enough, once it had been left to rot quietly through a wet spring and been written off in a ledger as spoiled, to have been sold twice, once to the crown as famine relief at famine prices, and once for silver at a border to whoever had the wagons. Halloran did not run. I will give him that much and nothing else. He stood in the mouth of that barrow with the torchlight behind him on my own seals, and he said, Every man in your treasury does this. Which I have since found is what they always say, and it is nearly always partly true, and it has never once been a defense. Not every man, I said, puts a woman under my mother's word to cover it. I stripped him there in the mouth of the barrow, his seal, his rod, his warrant of ward, in front of 180 people who had eaten at his table. And then I sent him to the far northern border to serve out his years at a watch post where there is nothing to take because there is nothing there. And I told him plainly in front of them all that he would keep his life in his hands and his children's name, and that he had my leave to consider that generous, because it was, and because I did not intend to begin my repentance by hanging a man in a wood at midnight. His children I took into the crown schooling at my own charge. That was Wenna's asking and not mine. I would have been harder. She said, they did not carry a sack, and I stood there in the dark and could not find one single thing to set against it. We emptied that barrow before dawn, and the grain went back up the ridge road the way it had come down, on our own horses in the dark, because not one person there was willing to wait for morning. Beaters carried it. Riders carried it. I carried a sack myself, and I want that on the record, not because it makes me a good king, because it does not. A good king would not have needed a 400-year-old animal to find his own seals in his own wood. I set it down because I have never in my life been so purely glad of a weight on my shoulder, and I have not been since. At Hollowbeck the old man with the swollen wrist stood in the door of the empty loft while it filled, and did not speak. And at the end of it he took my hand and put his forehead against the back of it, and I let him. And then I asked him, quietly, so that nobody else heard, because he had earned that who had swept the loft. She did, he said. The day the last cart went, she swept it out clean and set the besom in the corner, and we asked her what in God's name she was doing, and she said, when somebody finally comes and looks, I want them to see that it is not dirt. I want them to see that it is empty. At dawn in the great clearing, with the torches burned down to stubs and the whole muster standing there filthy and awake and past sleeping, I unmade my law. I did it out loud in the plainest words I had, and I did not let a clerk write it for me first. I said that 11 years ago a boy of 19 had made a law and had called it a cleansing, when it was a bandage laid over his own shame, and that the shame had never once been his mother's. I said Queen Malin of Greyhillow's name 3 times, so that it would be the last thing said about her in that country. And I said that from that morning any child in Greyhillow who had 3 words from a grandmother at a beck might keep them, and say them, and teach them on to whoever would take them, and that the crown would pay to have the old tongue written down while there was anyone left alive to write it, and that the first crown officer who put the word beast speaker in front of any name in my kingdom would answer to me for it personally and at once. Then I turned to Wenna of Hollowbeck in front of everybody, because she had spent a fortnight teaching me that this is how a thing is properly done, and I went down on one knee in the mud. "You are owed," I said, "so take it in whatever shape you want it. I will not ask you twice, and no answer you give me this morning will cost you anything. There is a freehold at Aldern 60 acres, a good roof, water, and nobody within a mile of it. I will sign it over this week and never come near it again. There is coin, enough that you never set another snare as long as you live, and passage south to any of the 3 ports, and a letter under my seal that will open any door on that road. There is a place at my court as the crown's own reader of the old tongue, salaried, with a hall of your own to teach in, and no obligation to me beyond the work and no requirement to be pleasant to me in any part of it. Or, and I found the last of it harder than all the rest together, which I am told is generally the case. Or there is my hand, and my hearth, and the seat beside mine, and a man who does not know one word of your grandmother's language and will be very slow in learning it, and who has been shown this month exactly how little he has been looking at. And if you take that one, you may set it down again on any day you choose, for any reason or none, and the freehold and the coin and the school will stand open behind it for the whole of your life. I will have that written and sealed before I get up off this knee." She did not answer quickly. She never once in all the years afterward answered anything quickly, and I came to understand that it was not caution. It was courtesy. She thought a question deserved to be actually thought about. She looked at the 4 villages standing there in the trampled fern, with their grain back on their own staddles. She looked at the northern trees, where a gray shape lay in the dark with its head on its paws, watching, the way it had watched me in the road that first morning, like a steward who has been waiting a very long time for somebody to arrive who is worth the trouble of opening the door for. Then she looked down at me, kneeling in the mud in front of my own muster. "You built that fire green side up," she said. "I did." "You will need somebody," said Wenna of Hollowbeck, "to show you which way the grain goes in." And she put out her hand and took mine. 180 people made a noise in that clearing that put birds up out of the wood a mile away, and under the northern trees the moon-wolf got to his feet and shook himself, and went home. We had 31 years. I will not lay them all out, because most of a good life is not a story. It is the same evening happening several thousand times and getting slowly better at being itself. She never took to the hall. She tried for about 2 years, out of a sense of duty that I eventually managed to argue her out of by pointing out that she had cured me of doing things out of a sense of duty, and could hardly go on doing them herself. She hated the long table and the seating order, and the way a room of 200 people changes its face when you walk into it. She said a hall was a place built, so that nobody in it would ever have to hear anything. What she took to was the wood edge, and the walking and Aldern. The school at Aldern opened in the 3rd year in a stone barn with a new roof, and I will admit here that I expected it to fail. I expected 6 people. I had made a grand speech in a clearing, and I assumed, in the way kings do, that the speech was the thing and the rest was administration. 41 came the 1st year, 68 the 2nd. They came in from 4 counties and later from over the northern border, and they were nearly all old women, and nearly all of them brought a child. That was the shape of it, a grandmother and a grandchild in 3 words and 100 repetitions each. It turned out there had been thousands of them the entire time. Not a lost language, a hidden one, carried 3 words at a stretch by people who had every reason to keep their mouths shut in front of anybody with a seal. The first one through the door I remember perfectly, because I was there and I was in the way. A woman from Little Rhine with a girl of about 6 by the hand, and she stopped on the threshold and would not come in because there was a king standing inside it. And Wenna took one look at the situation and put me out of my own school by the back door with a sack of apples to carry. And I stood in the yard eating an apple like a boy, while behind me, a frightened woman gave away the only thing she had ever owned in secret. Prentice, the clerk, did the writing down. He was at it for 19 years and he was still at it when he died, and he never got to the end because there is no end to it. There was no 1 grammar. There were 40 valleys worth. He filled 11 books. They are in the library at Aldern with a chain on them, and every so often somebody comes a long way to read them, and they are let in. She never told me what the 3rd word was. 31 years, and she would not. She said her grandmother had been right about keys. I said that was a highly inconvenient position for a Queen of Greyhollow to hold, and she said it was an excellent one, and that a man who has been given every single word he ever asked for makes a very poor king, and I said she had a way of winning an argument by putting it somewhere I could not reach, and she said, yes, and went back to her sewing. She did not use the 2nd word again either, after the barrow. Not once. She said it had been for a road and a wrong, and that a wood is not a servant, and that if she started asking she would end up asking for smaller and smaller things until one day she asked for something stupid. The Ellenwood stands. I have kept it standing, with a charter that is very hard to break, and that I made 3 separate parliaments swear to, and my grandson has renewed it. And if any of my line ever puts an axe to it, I hope somebody stops them with a spear. There is 1 moon wolf to a wood. He is old now even by his own accounting. He has gone white through the shoulders where the gray used to be, and the ring around his eye has widened year by year until it takes half his face. He does not come to the milk. He never needed the milk. She was right about that, as she was right about most things, including the fire. There was one winter, the 22nd, the hard one, when the beck froze to the stones and we lost 40 people in the north, when he did not come at all. Not once all season. She went down to the wood edge every night that whole winter and said nothing, because she said calling would be asking, and sat there in the cold until I came and got her. He came back at the thaw and lay down in the fern 20 paces off as though nothing whatever had happened, and she said, well, and that was the entire conversation about it, and I saw her hands shaking on the way back up the hill. She has been gone 2 winters this spring. I am 81 years old. I go down to the wood's edge every night that my legs will carry me, which is fewer nights than it used to be. I take a stool now, which she would have laughed at, that low laugh, more breath than voice, that always got out before she could stop it. I do not build a fire. I never did get the trick of it, and there is nobody left to be amused by that. I have exactly 1 word of the old tongue. 31 years in the same house as the finest reader of it in the north, a school of 11 books at Aldern with my seal on the door, and 1 word is all I ever managed to get my mouth properly around. She taught it to me the way it is done. 1 word, 100 times said back, no meaning given, although I knew the meaning of this one because it was hers. So that is what I do. I sit at the edge of the Ellenwood in the dark with my stool and my bad knees, and I say her name the way the wood says it, with the 2 syllables in front that I could not hold on to for 11 years and can hold on to now. And on some nights, out past where the torchlight used to reach, something very old and very tired lifts its white head up off its paws in the fern and answers,